belly. Give it a little belly pat. Look at that thing. Come on. So good. Howdy, I'm Kyle. Welcome back to The Current. Today, we're breaking down the 2 baits and the 4 personal best bass that I caught in 2024, striped, largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass. Stay tuned. We're going to get into the catches, the baits, and why you should make sure you add these baits to your arsenal, because not only do they catch fish, they catch big fish. But first, it wouldn't be gear without beer. This is the Trogs Hopora, an IPA from Pennsylvania, 6.2%. We're going to crack this thing open. Do a little test here. Smells like an IPA. Looks like an IPA. Tastes like a good IPA. It's a bit malty, not super hoppy. It's got good mouthfeel to it. It's a good sipping beer. It's a little thicker than something you'd want to chug for me personally. So yeah, I give it a 3.9. 3.9. All right, now back to fishing. All right, we're going to get you started with the first bait. We have got here the Optimum Baits Boom Boom Weedless Swimbait, designed in partnership with Fred Rumbanis, a legend on Clear Lake, where swim baits are key, big bass are caught, and the swim bait era basically started. They make these in multiple sizes. This is the OG, the 6-inch, 1.4 ounce, meant to be thrown on an 8/0 swim bait hook and thrown with like a screw lock swim bait style hook. They make these in multiple sizes. I personally like to fish that 6-inch that I just showed you and the 4.5-inch. As you can see, this box is almost empty, as is the other one. The 6-inch version, that comes in a 2-pack, and the 4.5-inch that is 0.6 ounces comes in a 3-pack. I use these probably twice as much as I use the larger 6-inch version. The 4.5-inch is a bit more versatile. You can catch small fish, big fish, and that's not to say you can't catch smaller fish on the big one, but you can definitely get more bites on the 4.5-inch. So that's the first bait. That's done me incredibly well over the past, I think I grabbed those for the first time 2 years ago. I grabbed like a pack of 6-inch and a pack of 4.5, and I started using those. Talk a little bit about the rigging of those 2 baits. 6-inch version, I typically go with an 8/0 swim bait hook. I personally like to fish it either with the flashy swimmer or just the traditional owner beast. I'm throwing that on a IMX Pro G Loomis. I think it's a 865. I'm fishing extra slow. It's winter time or dead of summer and I'm just slow rolling it on the bottom. Probably fishing no flash. If I'm moving it a bit quicker, I know they're on shad, I know they're chasing, I'll throw the flashy swimmer. For the 4.5-inch, I typically will throw it on a 4/0 or a 5/0. I lean more towards the 5. I've got here flashy swimmers, one with a willow and then one with Colorado. And the 4.5-inch, I get a lot more use out of it just because it's a bit more versatile. Can fish it around docks. I can kind of just throw it out, where I think there's fish, on points, creek mouths, so on and so forth. And this is how they look rigged. I mean, pretty straightforward. A regular old screw lock hook goes in the nose, comes out the center. There's a slot for it. And it's got a really, really solid boot tail on it. Very flat on the top and your traditional kind of rounded bottom. And one of the things that I read about recently is in 2022, this bait's been around since 2016. They changed the consistency of the plastic, and this thing is really soft. This one definitely has some teeth marks on it, as you can see there. It's gotten bit for sure, and I try to use them as long as I can because they're not super expensive, but they're not super cheap. But that's how they look out of the package. Like I mentioned, it's a soft bait for sure. The consistency of the plastic really does all the work for you while you're reeling it in, especially on the rod that I throw this on, that IMX Pro. You can feel every time that boot bounces back and forth, and the bait does the work for you. So this thing, I'm casting it up shallow, casting it under docks, really just letting it do the work for me and slow rolling it back in. This is how the 4.5 inch looks. Same profile, same everything, same, context of how it's laid out, length of the tail, like consistency of the style of the head, same as the boot on the back, flat top. It really, again, soft plastic. It's got a lot of bend to it. Like I mentioned, this one I use more than any swim bait, period, this 4.5 inch. And I throw that on like a medium heavy or a heavy rod, more of like a jig rod. I even throw it on a spinnerbait rod pretty often. It's not very heavy. We're talking like a 1/4 ounce weight on the hook, and this thing is 0.6 ounces. So you could manage throwing this on a rod that's rated for 3/8 ounce to an ounce. So let's jump in to the fish that I've caught on these two. This first fish, we're going to set the stage. James River, pitch black at night, 11:30 in the evening, April 2024. I finally figured out the tide getting right. I had anchored up on a spot that I anchor up pretty often just because I know that if I get in the right area, I've got multiple targets that I can throw at where a striper, this first fish, teaser, it's a striper, my PB striper. And I'd been casting around as I was anchored. I caught a couple of fish in a deeper hole that was to the left of me, and it's a pretty normal spot that I'll catch like the rats, whether they're 20 inches, 24 inches, those kind of standard schooly size stripers. And I'd caught a couple of fish, but the tide it wasn't right yet, and I knew it was coming. It was about, like I mentioned, 11:30 when I got anchored up. I got out there pretty late, but I knew that the stars were aligning, good moon phase, good water level, good tide that I was about to hit, good temperature, both water and air, and all of a sudden, things just started to change. I started hearing bait coming up the river. I started hearing pops like around me. Obviously, I couldn't see everywhere because it was pitch black at night. And finally, I cast to a spot where I know that there's some structure. There's a couple of big boulders that a lot of times when those striper are coming up the river, they'll sit behind and just kind of get lazy, wait for a moment to keep moving upriver, because during the spring, these fish are moving up to spawn. I'm talking like I'm in downtown Richmond. I can throw a stone at like downtown Richmond where I was anchored up at. Started to hear some bait. Heard a specific splash near the boulders I was referencing. And I made my 45-degree cast where I knew that I could get the right swing. So everything was intentional based on the current, where I knew the structure was, and how fast I knew I needed to rip the bait back. And boom, that first cast after hearing the bait crash, set the hook, get bit, set the hook, and it felt like a bigger fish. It certainly felt like a bigger fish. I'd been catching those 20, 24-inch fish, and chaos ensued. I brought that first fish in. It's like 28, 30 inches around that mark. It was a good fish, no question. I knew that was like a change of what was happening. I was starting to hear commotion, caught a bigger fish, cast it again, another fish. That fish was a little bit bigger. Now we're starting to enter the 30-inch class. And cast after cast for 3 straight casts. I had 3 fish, the best at 32 inches that I wouldn't say had topped my PB. I caught a really big one on Hartwell in February this past year in 2024 while I was practicing for a BFL. And on that very next cast, the 4th cast in a row, giant 8. I knew it was huge. I thought I was stuck on the boulder that I was referencing, and just all chaos, all hell broke loose. Had to unhook the anchor. The fish just started running as soon as it figured out it was hooked. So I'm chasing it down river, as you could imagine. Currents running. It's dark as heck. It's chaos. So I'm fighting the fish. Finally, she came to the net, dropped the net in, no issue, was hooked perfectly. It was just dream event, dream scenario. I'd been chasing, finding a really big striper at night, probably 3 days a week or 3 evenings a week for like 3 or 4 weeks, and finally just had a night where everything lined up. I was so excited, so just like taken aback when I saw the fish in the net. It was just massive. Stomach on it was huge. I let it sit in the water, took a couple of pictures, pulled it out. I had my phone on a tripod. I knew that there were going to be, after catching multiple in a row, I just set my phone up and started recording. And, I was getting those fish on camera, on video. It was exactly what I was hoping for. Had my flash on so I could at least, you could hear the audio of everything going down. And, both myself and, as you'll see in the photos, my dog she likes seeing fish get caught. She sees me get excited. I get excited. She gets excited. And so we're both having a great time. And I send my wife the photo, and I let her know I'm going to be out for a little while because tide turned on, everything lined up that I wanted to line up. It's like, hey, I'm going to be out here for a while. For me, I'm a night person, so it doesn't bother me being out till 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning fishing. I send her the photo. I send it to another buddy, and I start casting again. Same 45-degree angle. I have a target that I can look at. It's a bridge piling. I know the swing that it needs to get back to where it goes. Couple more casts, and boom, another solid fish, probably in like the 26, 28-inch range. And so the mayhem really started then. I thought there was chaos with catching, but unfortunately I'd been catching larger fish, and I saw this fish as it came to the side of the boat, and it was like, it was smaller than the rest of the fish, so under 28 inches. And I'm thinking like, I could flip this fish, no problem. I got no problem flipping this thing. Well, I'm thinking it's a bass basically, and it's probably 6-7 pound striper, and boom, rod snaps as soon as I lift it up. It's actually this rod. This was my first swim bait rod, the DXSB Daiwa. It's a cheapy swim bait rod. Great rod to get you into swim bait fishing, but broke at the third, just above the third guide, and snapped just right next to the boat. Rod tip or the other side of the rod's in the water, and I hear a bloop. So lo and behold, my camera that was on a tripod that was recording fell into the water, camera on, light on. I watch it just go like this down to the bottom. Bloop, 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 bloop. Can't do anything. Got my rod in one hand. I got a net in the other hand ready to grab the fish, and I pretty much just watched my phone sink to the bottom. And you're probably thinking, oh, why didn't you just jump in and grab it? Or why didn't you just put the net in the water and grab it? Got my hands full. I got a running current. My boat's not anchored. There was no way I could have done anything different. But thankfully, if there's one silver lining, and unfortunately you're going to hear more about this debacle after, if there was one silver lining, it was that I'd asked my wife or told my wife I was going to stay out a little longer and sent her proof of why. So the only evidence that I have from that epic night of striper fishing was the photo that I sent to my wife and my buddy. So that's what you're seeing here. The fish ended up weighing out at 17 pounds. It measured to 37 inches. It was without question the biggest striper that I've ever caught, and probably will be for a while, maybe until the next striper run. But that was a huge W. I caught every fish that night on the 6-inch Boom Boom Weedless swim bait from Optimum, the one we already walked through. And I ended up only using, I think I caught 10 fish that night. I only ended up using 2 of these throughout the whole night. The big thing that ended up happening, as we've all probably had happen, the screw lock pulled out, started having to cut the thing. And then these arms, this is kind of something that I've seen happen when you're really on them. These little fins here start to break off and it doesn't swim as good. These are kind of like a counterbalance in the water. But all in all, every fish that night was caught on that. And it was just so much fun. Throwing a big swim bait, just that chaos. I was so hyped. I honestly, if I hadn't been catching fish, I think if my phone would have fallen in the water and I was skunked, I would have been so mad. But because I was having such an epic time, the only thing I was worried about was, what if something happens to me? I'm out here by myself just with the dog. Otherwise, I didn't care about connecting with anyone, needing it for anything. And that's the first fish on the Boom Boom. 17 pounds, 37-inch striper, downtown Richmond, April of 2024. One of the most memorable evenings of striper fishing of my life. All right, second fish, my PB largemouth. Again, setting the stage. It's February, I think it was February 20th, mid-February in Florida. I'm down visiting my dad. He lives not far from the St. Johns River, and I really, really love fishing in Florida whenever I can get back down there. I grew up in Florida, spent my first 23 years there, fished inshore, offshore, bass, fly fishing, you name it. And I truly miss it. I haven't lived in Florida for 12 years, 11 years now. And whenever I get down there, I always bring my boat with me. We drive down probably 2 to 3 times per year, and the boat's always in tow. So if we're at my dad's house, I'm fishing the St. Johns. And on this trip, it was nasty. Winter storm came through. We're talking Florida winter, so it's relative to probably wherever you're at if you're not in Florida. but 40-degree air temps in the morning, and I committed to just going for it. Not only was it cold, but it was also pissing rain. It was nasty. Wind, rain, just abnormal Florida weather, at least for that full mix-up of pretty dang cold, really strong wind, ton of rain, basically nonstop. Thankfully, had my Sims gear, my bibs, my jacket, so it wasn't too cold, but I committed to just making it happen. If I'm going to be down in Florida, I'm going to fish. So proceeded to drop the boat in the water at 6 a.m. that morning and know a couple of areas from the closest boat ramp to my dad's house. So went straight to those areas. They're basically a stump field and then some kind of standing timber. And first cast, 2-pounder. Second cast, 3-pounder. I'm thinking immediately, holy cow, these fish are going to be biting. And fish kind of started to back off a little bit. I must have hit the right tide. Once again, St. John's, so it is tidal affected. So that was definitely where my mind was. I didn't have really a weather shift, no change in rain, no change in wind, but the fish kind of just backed off. So I know in Florida they're spawning December, January, February. You can find them kind of all throughout the winter in the spawn. And I'm thinking, we got a cold front. Let me go find a place that just looks like it could be a spawning area. And I'd heard about this kind of back bay or like big flat, and it looked really good. Pads all over the place, some laydowns in the pads. It's probably on average 2 to 6 feet deep. It's a little probably 100-yard wide basin, and it had 2 arms to it. And so I'm casting the 4.5-inch Boom Boom Swimbait as close to the pads or in the pads if I could. This thing runs pretty well from a weedless perspective as long as you rig it right. You really, drive that hook drive the point of the hook into the top of the bait to hide it. You can get this thing pretty deep in cover, and so I was doing that. Throwing it at the pads. Every time I saw a laydown, I knew that could have been a potential area. And I came up to the point where these 2 creeks branched off. And on that point, there was a laydown. So I'm thinking, this is key habitat, prime time. And first cast, throw it as deep as I could into the pads so I could roll it, just kind of bounce it over the laydown that was on top of the pads. I mean, as soon as it hit the water, the pads just V'd up. I saw a fish just move immediately, and boom, thing just absolutely annihilated. There was no question it was bottom this time compared to my striper, and the fish just took off, got me kind of hung up in the laydown that I had thrown above, got it out thankfully, and after that it was pretty quick thankfully. The caveat, as I mentioned, I fish this usually on a spinnerbait rod or like a jig rod, and I was fishing this at that time on a medium heavy Dobbins Fury. I want to say it's like the 733 or 743. And that's not a super heavy rod, fishing it with 15-pound fluorocarbon. So I'm thinking, 1, I got to be careful because this fish could break off. And 2, I got to get this thing in. Thankfully, once it got out of that laydown, came both sides, grabbed the net, put it in the net, and I was just in total shock. I knew that I'd committed to fishing in this garbage weather I always know that that's like, for me, type 2 fun. While you're doing it, you're in your head like, why the hell am I doing this? But when something like that happens, it's just immediate confirmation of why we do what we do, and why, if you're obsessed like fishing, or obsessed with fishing like me, why we do it. Great confirmation when the conditions are terrible and you can find a fish like this. I let the fish swim around in the net. I took a breath. I'm shaking, just so freaked out. One, I'm on vacation. I know I'm only going to be out for a couple hours. I'm not expecting anything like this to happen. So I take a break, let the fish kind of calm down for a sec, let me calm down for a sec, pull out the scale, as you'll see in the video. One caveat, this was in February, mid-February, like I mentioned, and my iCloud on my phone had gotten full like 7 days before this. So I had no backups on my phone from mid-February until my phone went in the water in April. Unfortunately, the only proof that I have of this fish is what I posted on Instagram. So this is what you're going to see here. And that fish taped out at 23 inches. It was 7 pounds, 15 ounces. So basically an 8-pounder. My PB prior to that was 6 pounds, 8 ounces. At least that was weight on a scale. This is something I normally don't do, but I called it a day. I did not pick the rod back up and I left. That was one of the moments, probably the only moments, where when I caught a massive fish, I felt that much success. And thanks to the Optimum Boom Boom Weedless Swimbait, that 4.5 inch, I actually was using the BKK, I think this is a Titan diver, in a 5/0. I was using this setup. This is definitely not the one. This thing's pretty clean. It doesn't look like it's even been bit. That was my second PB of the year. That was, again, on that Boom Boom Weedless Swimbait. When I'm throwing a swimbait, or I feel like I should be throwing a swimbait, I'm probably thinking about the Boom Boom or throwing the Boom Boom. All right, so we've got the next bait of the 2 baits that have caught my 4 PBs. And on deck, the Yamamoto Scope Shad. We've got this here in all of the sizes, but I started fishing these things when I first got Live Scope, before they launched their larger sizes. This is the 3-inch model. You've got a 3.5 inch, and you've also got a 4-inch. These are a staple on the deck of my boat, but when I'm pinging a minnow or Damiki rigging, the Scope Shad is my go-to. Color-wise, I fish a couple of different ones, but they're all shad based. So this is the Sexy Shad. I'll give you a glimpse of it. I'll give you a glimpse of all of them. So this is the 4-inch Sexy Shad. As you'll see, the top is pretty flat, and then you've got some, concave here. So it's kind of like a triangle. So when you're bringing this back to the boat, it's got like a natural bounce to it, or a shake. And then it's got this kind of forked tail on it, and a pretty soft tail. I've found that during the winter, this bait is not getting bit as much, because I think there's a lot of action there in the water, especially with this larger one, being that the tail is obviously longer. So that's the 4-inch in the Sexy Shad. As you can see, the Sexy Shad has some translucent bottom and like a grayish blue top color to it, and some gold flake in it. Then we have the 3.5s. This is the natural shad color. So it's not a a two-tone plastic. It's all one color. It's more of a grayish, purplish blue with a gold and black flake in it. And again, that fork tail, but as you could imagine, it's a 1/2 inch smaller, so that tail's a bit smaller. It doesn't have as much movement, but it's still, those little appendages or forks move quite a bit in the water. And then finally, the one I've definitely fished the most, my wife can probably attest to this because there's bags of these all over the house. They're on my nightstand. They show up in the washing machine. Probably got 20 packs of these 3 inches sitting around the house and in the boat. This finally, the electric shad. So the difference here, the flake in it is not gold. It's more of a purplish color. Very similar top color with a grayish, bluish, purple, more gray than that sexy shad color. And it's got that same translucent bottom. And again, it's like as you turn it, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but it's kind of got like a fluorescent purple look to it, like all the way around it. When I do this against this light that I have here, it kind of shows off this purplish color. And again, that fork tail, but it's a bit smaller, so I find that the 3 inch definitely works a bit better in the winter because it's a bit more subtle, not as much movement. And how I'm fishing that, I've got a couple of different heads here. I'll start off with the one I use most frequently. It's the Gamakatsu Round 26. This is my favorite ball head jig. The hook on it is really stout. I was fishing a couple of different other jig heads for a while that I continued to just have issues with the hooks bending out or breaking. If I caught a catfish and I tried to take it out of his mouth, it would just snap. I'm not going to name any other brands, but this is the only hook that I found that will not do that. These are the 3/16 2/0. This is probably the one I use most frequently. I've got 10 packs in the boat. And then one that probably everyone's heard of, the Owner Range Roller. The Range Roller is really nice because it's got that elongated weight inside of it. So it sits a lot flatter, not like a traditional ball head where all the weight's up forward. And it's got a really nice hook keeper on it. I like to fish this with when fish are a bit spookier, when they're definitely, you can tell on live scope they're a bit more sensitive, and I don't need as much weight. These are 3/32, 1/0. I usually fish that with like the 3.5 and more frequently on the 3 inch bait. And then finally, when they are extra finicky, or I've already thrown into a school and I caught one out of it and I'm hoping that something happens, they forget that they just got caught on the bait. The hover rig from Core Tackle. These are this is the 16th ounce. I really like the way that these rig up. Obviously you're not going to see a ball head or a head on a jig with these. They basically integrate entirely into the plastic. So it's, again, that kind of elongated, that weight that goes in there. And it's got some shears on it, or whatever you want to call this, so that the bait doesn't slide off of it. These have been a staple too, but I'm mostly fishing these with the 3 inch as well. So versatile all around, a bit heavier, can cast it a mile, can fish it on all 3 sizes, the 3, the 3.5, and the 4 inch with the Round 26. Little more subtle presentation with the Range Roller when they're a bit more finicky and I can tell with live scope and they need something to kind of hover in front of their face. The Range Roller. And then when they're really finicky, the hover rig from Core Tackle. So going into the first fish with the Scope Shad, my smallmouth, my PB smallmouth of 2024, of period. All of these fish are PBs across the board, my personal best, period. And all 4 of them came in 2024. So I'd been fishing Smith Mountain Lake pretty religiously on a good cadence every month, sometimes more than a month. It quickly has become one of my favorite lakes in the state. Between smallmouth, largemouth, big stripers, you can really have kind of a mixed species day and do all kinds of stuff throughout the day. But the day that I was out on the water was November 7th. I'd very much wanted to focus on big smallmouth. I'd been out there early October, mid-October, and had a phenomenal day on Main Lake points, some rocky points, chasing schools of bait, and catching smallmouth. I caught a 310, a 306, a 211, and a couple other largemouth. And one day I had like a 15-pound bag, which was my personal biggest bag on Smith Mountain Lake. Not massive, but not small by any means. And I personally, I'd say if I had to choose one bass, it'd be smallmouth. I've grown to just absolutely love them in all the places that they live. Rivers, lakes. Yeah, I just really, I love smallmouth. So I went out with the intention to catch a PB smallmouth that day, which thankfully what happened throughout the day, I met that goal. I hit my usual haunts where I had caught fish the couple weeks before that, saw fish where they were supposed to be. They had moved a little deeper off the points that I had caught them on before. So weekend before I was catching them in like 9 to 12 feet of water. This week they'd moved out off the points, like closer to the drop-offs, but they were still floating or suspending, but suspending in like 18 to 25 feet of water. So changed my tactic a little. I was fishing I want to say the range roller the weekend before, so I swapped to the round 26, put on the 3.5 inch. I was excited to fish it because I think it might have been first time I had gotten the larger baits. And I had a couple of missed opportunities. I hooked a couple of fish throughout the day, but they were acting funny. So I'd expected I'd probably only got there at like 6:30, and I was probably going to fish till 2 p.m. And I made the move that I hate to make every time. I gave my wife a phone call and asked her if it was okay to stay out for an extra hour. She obliged. My wife is great with knowing that if I'm going to call, it's probably for a reason. And no more than seconds after I put the phone down with my wife, giant school of fish just started blowing up within a couple 100 yards from me. I thought, no question, these are big striper. It's a point that I've caught and striper off of before. And I'm thinking, I'm going to get a consolation prize out of this so I don't get skunked throughout the day. Screw it. I'm going to catch one of these dang striper. So troll up to the spot where I had seen them. They were actually still busting on the surface, probably for an entire minute. Cast out the Scope Shad. Boom, within 2 seconds of it hitting the water, I didn't even see it on live scope, just nailed a fish. Thought without question, this has got to be a striper. The thing just took off, nose down, never jumped, and really just bulldogged me. So I'm thinking, cool, I got a 10-pound striper on. I'm going to be happy with this. Gets next to the boat, I see color. I'm like shaking at this point. Oh my God. I set out to catch my 5-pounder. I had said in my head, I want a 5-pound smallmouth. I don't know if that's going to be possible on Smith Mountain Lake, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And I see this fish and I immediately think, this is my 5-pounder. The thing was just had a gut on it that just massive. I gave it a nice belly pat when it came in the boat, but didn't give me too much trouble as I pulled out the net, dropped it in, got him in there. Again, same scenario as the largemouth. I'm shaking, let the fish kind of take its time in the net for a sec. I get it out of the net. I'm like, I'm gonna put this fish in the live well. I'm gonna keep fishing because I know if there's some fish around school and chasing bait, I'd seen bait on the sonar before. I'm gonna keep fishing. Finally, just chasing them around, didn't catch any more. Weighed the fish. She weighed 4 pounds 1 ounce. I thought without question it was going to be at least 4.5, but just over 4 pounds, 19.5 inches. So proportionally, that fish was fat. I mean, had a gut on her. 19.5 inch fish could be 3 pounds at some times of the year. I caught my first citation, my only citation, 2 years ago, James River fish. It was 20 1/4, and that fish probably weighed 3.5. No question, this was my PB. And that was kind of it for the rest of the day. I chased some bait around, and again, I made the call to my wife, which hate making that call, asking for more time. I've got a child. We're a toddler. We're at my in-laws' house. I don't want to make myself look like a fool, but it was all worth it in the end. The Scope Shad made it happen, and I was, super thankful that, one, my wife let me stay out, and two, that happened when it happened. Again, that Scope Shad's been a staple on the front deck for me. Even before that, it's my go-to scoping bait. And last but not least, this was my PB spotted bass by a pretty big margin. I was fishing a new to me lake. Last year I fished the ABA region 8 or something like that, the ABA James River series. I don't know. One of the ABA tournament series, and Gaston was on the list a couple of times. So pre-fishing, my buddy lives close to Gaston, took him out, and I focused my strategy on a specific creek, the docks and the points in that creek, some main lake points and some main lake docks that I'd heard could produce some good fish, both largemouth and spotted bass. So cycled through quite a few spots. We caught quite a few fish on points and flats in that creek that I'd mentioned. So we stuck around in there for a while, kept rotating through some different points, some different flats, continued to catch fish. Nothing too big. I think I caught a 2-pounder, maybe a little bit bigger than that. And again, I was utilizing live scope, looking for bait balls. All the fish that I found before that were chasing schools of bait, so that Yamamoto Scope Shad came into play, and this was before I think they launched the larger sizes, so I was only fishing the 3-inch Scope Shad. And one of the spots that we'd fish, here's the setup of the spot. The creek it's pretty big. It's the largest creek on Gaston, so you probably know what it is if you fish Gaston. And it's a flat that's really close to the channel, so they've got access to deep water, and this is definitely spawning time, spring, and I'm thinking, there's definitely going to be fish here, rocky area, and we start catching fish. I find a nice rock pile that we're pulling some pound and a half, 2-pound spots off of. Both myself and my buddy in the back were catching fish, and we're having a good time. And I just kind of say in passing, it's not normal that big fish will live with the smaller fish. And right now, I'm trying to find where we can catch some bigger fish. So let's make a couple of more casts and let's go try another spot. Maybe we go to the main lake. Next cast right after that, make a blind cast just out into nowhere up on this flat. The flat's probably 6 feet, between 4 and 6 feet deep, really clear water. Start shaking the minnow, bouncing it back to the boat, and boom, fish just takes off, grabs it and takes off. And I'm thinking catfish, no doubt. It felt like a freight train. The fish came off of a stump, which we saw once we motored up to it, or trolling motored up to it, because it was stuck on the stump for a second. And we get it off. Within seconds, it's in the net, boat side, and this thing was just a freak. I knew that without question this thing was my biggest spot, period. It had just an absolute gut on it. Definitely filled, ready to spawn. I learned a lot from that specific fish, just knowing that spotted bass spawn in a bit deeper water. They can handle a little more pressure. They're not as wary, I think, as a largemouth, because they're just such an abundance of them on Gaston. And we got it in the boat. I knew immediately it was a PB. I weighed it with one scale, my Bubba scale. It was 3.14. I was thinking for sure it was over 4 just by its stomach, and it was pretty long.
Oh, yeah.
So I pulled out my old Rapala scale, weighed out at 385. So it was a 3 pound, 14 ounce fish basically. But I'd personally call it a 4-pounder all day. It was an epic fish, again on that scope shad, just blind casting it, bouncing it, and set her back into the water, ready to make some more spotted bass babies. That Lake Gaston is just, it's filled with spots, but I think they're fun as heck. And send her back and hope to catch another big old spot eventually on Gaston. That was a real fun fish. So that rounds out my 4 fish, 2 baits, all of them PBs, all 4 of those PBs, all 4 of them in 2024. 2024, without question, from a bass fishing perspective, my best year of fishing in my life. It's the most I've probably ever fished, which is a blessing for sure, or whatever you want to call it. Like, I've got a toddler. My wife is an angel. She knows that I need to fish. Lets me go when I want to go for the most part. And those 2 baits, if you don't have a scope shad in a shad color in that 3-inch, 3.5, or 4-inch, or the Boom Boom, gosh, these things, I can't say enough good things about these guys. A mag draft, love throwing a mag draft, but I'm going to reach for this before a mag draft almost every time. The thump of that tail is really just a game changer. They cast great, they skip great, they run weedless really well. This smaller one's so versatile. These scope shads, now that they come in all different colors and all different sizes, they're also pretty darn versatile. You can fish that 4-inch, the 3.5, the 3. You can fish it with a hover rig. You can fish it with the range roller, which is kind of a hybrid between the hover rig and a ball head. You fish it with a ball head. Both of those baits, big staples on the deck of my boat. Hopefully, after this video, you're convinced that you'll need them, whether you're fishing live scope or not. 3 of those fish did not come on live scope. The smallmouth did come on live scope. But both of those baits, staples, get them on your boat. Make sure you let me know if you catch your PB on them, but I can guarantee you they're gonna catch you fish. So thanks for tuning in. Reminder, I'm Kyle with The Current. If you like this video, hit that subscribe button, leave me a comment, let me know what you think. If you've got these baits already, if you've had success with them, or you're thinking about grabbing them and have any questions, happy to answer anything and everything about them. Excited to share this video with you and hope y'all enjoyed those stories. Tune back in next time. We'll see you soon.